Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The expectation is a Cut The Clutter episode on what's happening in Israel and around it. And it's a fair expectation because this is the biggest story in the world right now. Dominates everything. Not only does it dominate international affairs, but also greatly affects the domestic politics of many nations. Not just in the Middle East or in the periphery of Israel, but also big capitals of the world. This is the big event. In fact, in some ways, it's about as important as the war in Ukraine. Now, we know that the war in Ukraine involved two superpowers. It involved Russia, a military superpower, a qualified military superpower, not a superpower otherwise, and NATO at the other end. This, however, is a European, a Western enclave in Asia, that is Israel, and that's now under attack. And the US and also with that the Western Alliance are all sworn to protecting Israel, and the Israelis themselves are quite well equipped to fight back, not just fight back, but to also launch war. So they have now responded to the attacks by Hamas, which is not a state. Hamas is a militant organization. It's a fundamentalist militant organization, now globally acknowledged to be a terrorist organization, right? A distinction is made between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, which sits at Ramallah. So those Palestinians, we don't use the expression terrorist for them, but Hamas is a terrorist organization. On that, there is very little argument globally. Now, Hamas has launched this surprise attack on Israel, surprise, effective, and for the moment, for the first 24 hours, very successful. Evidence of that you've seen on your TV screens. And now you're seeing the numbers of the dead and the wounded, that's coming out. And you're seeing retaliations also. How have the Israelis responded to this? So I can do no better than to quote Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister of Israel, who says, this is war for our existence in the region, and there will be steps that have never been seen before. And then he announced a full blockade of Gaza, which is a small strip. You can see it on the map. As such, Israel is a very small country, and geographies in that region are very small. But Gaza in particular is a small strip. It's not landlocked. It opens out to the Mediterranean, but on the land, on one side, it is linked to Israel, on the other, Egypt. So the dependence on outside support, on outside economic and food and electricity for Gaza, for Gazans, is enormous. Now, that Gaza has been blockaded by Israelis. That's what the Israeli defense minister said. He also said there will be no food, no fuel, no electricity. And then bombing has gone on. You see many pictures. You will see some of your screen as I speak. These are nighttime bombings being carried out by Israeli Air Force and long-range artillery on Gaza. Apparently, or the claim is that these are targeting Hamas commanders and Hamas control centers. At the same time, in built-up areas, it's very difficult to say what is where. So if a whole building is brought down, a whole tower is brought down, as happened the first day, a bunch of towers were brought down. It was said, for example, that Hamas radio was operating from one of those. Hamas radio station was operating from one of those. So a warning is given out just a little bit earlier for people to vacate the building, and then the entire building is brought down. So it's a lot of destruction, and you can see that destruction on your screens. Now, all of this is happening. All of this is happening, and it raises many questions. So the challenge for me was that I can go on. I mean, how do you consolidate what you're going to say? So first of all, this is a big story. It's going to be with us for the next few days. So the chances are that next couple of days, 3 days, maybe even 4, Cut the Clutter episodes will focus on certain aspects or some aspects of what's going on in this region and around Israel. That's why it's important for me to compartmentalize, at least for today, what I'm going to speak about. So for today, I would say, let's look at 5 questions. 5 questions: what happened? 2, what went wrong? 3, how does Hamas justify this? 4, what's the global reaction where India stands? And 5, what may happen? Now, these are 5 good questions. The first question, we know what happened. All of you know what happened, that Hamas invaded Israeli mainland. These are not settlements, Israeli settlements, Jewish settlements on the West Bank. This is the Israeli mainland as Israel inherited in 1948. It is that mainland. So Gazans broke through the wall or the fence that the Israelis have built along their border with Gaza. It's a very expensive barrier. It cost more than $1 billion, and given how small the geography is, how little the distance is, it's a lot of money. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the Gazans broke through it or came over it in hang gliders, or in some cases motorized gliders. Many came in through the tunnels that they've been building, and many then, once they had got the breakthrough, many then drove bulldozers into the fence and broke it and came across it. This came on a day of the big annual festival in Israel, so everybody was essentially asleep. And the formidable Israeli army, the very formidable Israeli army and the intelligence agencies were taken by surprise. So that's what we know. Then we know that some of these glider-borne terrorists reached a rave festival that was taking place, killed a lot of people there who was just dancing, enjoying themselves. They were not expecting to be attacked. Also, these attacks took place in the area of Israel where security in depth is not that heavy, because people are not expecting to be attacked in these areas. Jewish settlements on the West Bank, for example, people are armed. Jewish settlers are armed because they are expecting to be attacked anytime. Not in this area, because this is the Israeli mainland. So this is what happened, and then we know the Israelis have been retaliating since then. Now the question is, what went wrong? Because the whole world lays such store by Israeli intelligence, Mossad, Israeli armed forces. How could this have gone wrong? Because Israelis know that they live in a tough environment. They've seen many wars before. In fact, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant now says this is a war for our existence in the region. The fact is that Israelis have forever been fighting wars for their existence in the region. And I'm not even taking you back to the 1960s or the 1950s, but say, look at the last 20 years, 2006, 2008-9, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2019, 2022. That is when trouble took place at Al-Aqsa Mosque, following which there were lots of attacks on Israeli settlements, etc. So Israelis have been always fighting for what they see as their existence. So for a country in that situation, and for a country which takes pride in producing the best technology in the world for intelligence, espionage, surveillance, how did they go wrong? So I'm leaning on a top award-winning Israeli journalist and commentator, Nahum Barnea. Nahum Barnea is writing in a paper called Yedioth Ahronoth, and he says that 4 blunders have taken place. 4 blunders. What are these blunders? 1 is intelligence failure. 2, how was the border breached? Because after all, you have this fence with all these protections. How was the border breached? 3, how did Hamas manage to take hostages back into Gaza? How were they not stopped before that? And 4, why were Israeli defense forces so slow in their reaction? And then he explains, first of all, he says intelligence ignored many warnings that existed even earlier. So he says, first of all, intelligence failure lies in the fact, not because Hamas was so clever that the Israelis never found out, but because there were many indications, but just as it happened in 1973, Yom Kippur War, that there were many indications that Egyptians may be launching an attack, Israeli intelligence dismissed it as just idle training, that people are training. If people are training to use hang gliders or motorized gliders, you would normally think, what are they planning, right? But in this case, Israeli intelligence probably concluded that this was just idle training. This will not lead to anything. Again, this is a fence. It's a very expensive fence. I told you it's more than $1 billion worth. In fact, Yedioth Aharonot's article says 3.5 billion shekels. It's a very expensive fence. It's an expensive fence with sensors above it, under it, on it, right? And cameras and technologies everywhere. Important thing is it's an unmanned fence because you rely so much in technology and alarms that if anybody tries to cross it, touch it, come near it, there'll be an alarm and somebody will wake up and immediately take action. Now that is brilliant. That is excellent as long as you are only seeing a threat from the odd infiltrator. The odd infiltrator or a group of terrorists, maybe 4, 5, 6, 10, who are trying to cross the fence and come in. Because even if they cross it, you can catch them somewhere because you will have an alarm. You are not prepared for people coming in, large masses of people coming in on their own vehicles, on bulldozers, and literally crushing this fence and coming into your territory. For that, they were not ready. So that's what happened. That is the first two failures. The intelligence failures, where indications were there, but everybody thought it was just idle training. And two, how the border was breached. So Nahum Barnea also points out to the fact that so many of these people came in and IDF seemed to be in such deep sleep and so complacent that bands of these terrorists were walking around one of the big armored core tank bases of Israeli army as if they are own. You've seen those pictures of Hamas having taken away an Israeli main battle tank. So he said they were walking around an armored core base as if theirs. And then I quote from him, that is Nahum Barnea, who says, and I quote, "I suddenly felt like I do not live in Israel, which I am proud of, but in Somalia." So these are very strong words. So what went wrong? Second question is answered with these 4 failures that we just described for you. Third question, how did Hamas justify this and motivate people? Because after all these people coming in would have known that chances of their going back alive or going back as free people are very poor. Some who went back with hostages, yes, they escaped. How long for and how long do they live? I don't know, because Israelis will reign hell over Gaza now, and they've been doing it already. But Hamas had a war cry, and that war cry we understand from the name that they chose for this operation. They called this operation Tufan al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is the name of the mosque in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa, also Dome of the Rock. We'll talk about that for a couple of minutes just now. But Al-Aqsa is the second holiest place for Muslims. Now, Al-Aqsa is where for the past 2 years, clashes between Israeli security forces and Palestinian Muslims break out routinely at Al-Aqsa. But last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, in the month of Ramzan, clashes have been really bad. And I will talk about those clashes in just a minute. But it is because of those grievances. It was riding those grievances that Israeli security forces were much too tough and brutal with Muslims praying at one of their holiest mosques during the month of Ramzan. That Hamas was able to motivate their cadres, and that's also one of the reasons that Hamas and its operations are finding such wide support in the Islamic world. Now, of course, whenever any operation is carried out by any Palestinians means there are two kinds of Palestinian forces in that area. One is Palestinians who live under the Palestinian Authority, which is headquartered at Ramallah. The other is the Palestinians living in Gaza. Now, anytime any clash takes place between Palestinians and the Israelis, irrespective of who starts it, there is sympathy in the Muslim world. There is also a sympathy, great sympathy among left parties and left intellectuals across the world. That is a well-known thing. So Hamas has also pegged its entire operation, everything they've done, on what's been happening in Al-Aqsa Mosque. So if you go to social media and you see pictures of Israelis who've been killed, who've been maimed, who've been taken as hostages, who are being beaten, dragged by their hair, women being dragged by their hair and taken as hostages. So immediately the response you get from social media, from critics of Israelis, that see, this is what the Israeli armed forces have been doing to unarmed Arabs, unarmed, devout Arabs, including women, old women, children in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, there is a difference of degree, but when passions are hot and they start clashing, then nobody looks at nuance. So that is how Hamas has been able to justify it to the larger support base of Palestinians across the world, or the larger community of Israeli critics across the world, but also to motivate their own cadres. Now, in our episode 744, that was 3 years back, almost 3 years back, we had explained to you what Al-Aqsa Mosque is and what is the complexity of East Jerusalem. That is when the Sheikh Jarrah riots had broken out. Now, I will once again explain this to you, because Al-Aqsa is so central to this. Al-Aqsa is not close to where Gaza is. In fact, I will share with you a map that our people have drawn, my colleagues have drawn, that tells you the map of Israel, where Gaza is located, and the respective range of many missiles that the Hamas has. So that also tells you where East Jerusalem is. So Al-Aqsa is located there. Now, Jerusalem, 1948, when there was a war between the Jews who were coming in, Jewish settlers who were coming in at that point mostly from Europe, because they were escaping the Holocaust, and they had been promised a country of their own, which is now Israel, and also Arabs who were living there and Arabs who came in from outside. So at the conclusion of that war, Jerusalem was divided. West Jerusalem remained with the Israelis. East Jerusalem was not with the Israelis. It was a kind of mixed control, right? It was until 1967 mostly not in Israeli control, and there was a lot of fighting between people, and there was a lot of firing, and there was a lot of exchange of fire between Israeli soldiers in West Jerusalem and from Palestinian fighters in the east. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Israelis went and took over East Jerusalem. But the status of East Jerusalem still remains uncertain, because that is where the Arab population, the Palestinians, are still very strong. And around that area, there are still many areas, and around that geography, there are still many areas which are under the Palestinian Authority, and that's where clashes break out often. Now, once again, if you come to Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Aqsa in a way means the last mosque or the most distant mosque. The story is, when the Prophet started from the holy mosques of Makkah and Medina, he came as far as Jerusalem, and it is from here, from the shrine, very picturesque shrine, you will see a picture called Dome of the Rock, that it is from here that the Prophet ascended to heaven to meet Allah on his lightning horse, went in and came back very quickly, because Allah then introduced him also to many of the other prophets who were there, including Prophet Jesus, Prophet Adam, and all the others, Prophet Jacob, and came back. It is also the place which is holy to Jews, because Jews think this is where Abraham offered his son in sacrifice to God, but God revealed himself and intervened and didn't let him do it. Once again, remember these three great faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I'm not listing them like this in any order of importance or any order of preference. I'm only listing them chronologically, because Judaism came first, then came Christianity, and then came Islam. For all three of them, this little piece of real estate is their holiest real estate, or among their holiest real estates. For the Jews, their second temple, which was built by Herod in 516 BCE and was destroyed in 70 CE by the Romans, that stood there. It is on top of that second temple of the Jews that Dome of the Rock is located. So this is really Babri Masjid, Ram Janmabhoomi multiplied several times over. And remember, just walking distance, maybe on a maybe if you don't have many people on the street, just a few minutes away is the Church of Holy Sepulchre. That's where Jesus Christ was crucified and resurrected. So for Jews, Christians and Muslims, this little place is among their holiest places and definitely the most disputed for all three faiths. The shrine itself, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built and rebuilt several times. 8th century AD, a prayer hall was built by Omar II, the second caliph of the Rashidun Caliphate, in the place where it was said that the Prophet prayed before he ascended to the heaven and came back on his lightning horse, the Burak. Then subsequently, Abdul Malik, who was the 5th caliph in the Umayyad Caliphate, he built a larger structure there. 1033, Dome of the Rock, or the Shrine of Dome of the Rock, or the mosque, took shape. The mosque has been there since then, and you know what happens? Because anytime there is festival season, just as it used to happen in the days of communal riots in our country, in this place, if the month of Ramzan coincides with the Jewish week of Passover, then people go in the same area to pray, etc. And you know who has the state power? It's the Israelis who have the state power, and clashes took place and clashes take place. So 2022, the month of Ramzan was April 2 to May 2. Trouble had started there even earlier, before the month of Ramzan began. So April 2 to May 2 was the month of Ramzan. April 15 to April 23 was the week of Passover. Easter was April 17. I told you all three Abrahamic faiths. It's an irony. All three faiths are Abrahamic faiths, and all three at this point are contesting this space. The Christians are not in this trouble right now. It is entirely the Muslims and the Jews. 2022 clashes took place. Again, Israeli army security forces went in. There was a lot of beating, use of rubber bullets, etc. And then there were reprisals by Palestinians. So many Jewish settlements were attacked. In that melee stuff that happened, followed after the Al-Aqsa action in 2022, 17 Israelis were killed. 17 Jewish Israelis were killed. Once again this year, 2023, the month of Ramzan was 22nd March to 20th April. You know, every year Ramzan comes about 2 weeks earlier. So this year in 2023, Ramzan was 22nd March to 20th April. Passover was 5th April to 12th April, and Easter was 9th April. So once again trouble broke out on 15th of April. And those pictures then of trouble that went around the entire world, particularly the Muslim world, particularly the Palestinian world, and they were then very useful fuel, emotional fuel in the hands of the Hamas. Now, fourth question, what's the global reaction? What's the global reaction? We've seen that the entire Western world has condemned this. Entire Western world has condemned this unequivocally. In fact, in the Western world, nobody has said anything about what we might call as root causes. Because you know what happens when we in India get hit by terrorists coming in from Pakistan, somebody reminds us of root causes. You haven't settled the Kashmir problem, or you did this in Ayodhya or Babri Masjid, or you did this in such and such place. We say this is nonsense. Don't give us the root causes theory. When 26/11 happened, Bombay was attacked, UPA was in power. UPA government also completely dismissed out of hand anybody who would have said root causes. What about the root causes of this problem? Just because you have a problem in Kashmir, you can't just come anywhere, in this case Mumbai, and start killing innocent people. So there is no root causes justification. So all of the Western world, a lot of the other world, there is no root causes justification. Most of the other world, China included, Russia in fact, almost sounds like they're partisan towards Hamas without quite saying so. China, very equivocal, basically following the root causes theory. All of the global south, so-called global south, that has painted such big time on Modi government's discourse lately. All of the global south is either fence sitting or sitting the other side of the fence from Israel, saying resolve the Palestinian issue first. That's also surprisingly the line that Congress Working Committee has taken. Modi government's line is clearly stated in this tweet by Narendra Modi, Prime Minister himself, and see that tweet on your screen. In fact, if you see this tweet, and then I will contrast this with the tweet by Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, with whom India now has very many differences. You will find that essentially both are saying the same thing. So India's official reaction to this is unequivocal of support to Israel, and India joins the Western world in calling Hamas terrorists. There is no qualification there at all. Not the Congress party, and Congress party is the major opposition party, is the main opposition party. So we have to take that into account. Now, at one ironical level, this also tells you that if India is isolated at all, it's isolated in the global south, whose leadership it's been seeking all this while, I would say not very wisely. And I wrote a whole national interest article on this, of which I will again share a link with you, both of the text version and the video version. But generally, the Western world, fully with Israel, the most important response I have seen, and the most important response I have seen, and in fact the most telling, is from the British Labour Party. British Labour Party has been having its annual convention, and I saw their response on Al Jazeera and the BBC, and I found the reporters, anchors trying to get a response out of their spokesperson, Labour Party spokesperson, saying that Labour Party spokesperson said that our party believes this is terrorism. There is no justification for terrorism. This violence is appalling. I'm quoting them verbatim. This is terrorism. There is no justification for terrorism. This violence is appalling. And even when the anchors try to take them towards the Palestinian issue, saying, but this has other causes. Are you thinking of addressing other causes? The Labour Party spokesperson said, those will be discussed later. Those will be discussed in the future. Right now, what's happened is a terrorist attack. Violence is appalling, and Israel has fully the right to defend itself. That is the G7 Western Alliance's reaction, where support for Israel is cut across party and ideological lines. It's in India, however, that this response remains divided. But also the interesting point is, an important point is, that India's official reaction is exactly the same as that of the Western world. Which brings us to the final question. What may happen now? I will share with you a long article, a 2021 article by Anthony Cordesman, who's one of the foremost and senior-most strategic affairs experts sitting in Washington. He's currently Emeritus Chair in Strategy, and Arleigh Burke, Chair in Strategy at Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. So I've taken this paper from the CSIS website. I will share a link to the full paper with you. Please check it out. Read it patiently. But basically, 5 points that he has made, and I will leave it at that. Number one, he says that wars in 2006, 2008-9, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2019, 2022 have shown that Israeli armed forces are formidable, but they've been unable to decisively degrade the terrorist firepower or manpower, or the ability of the terrorists to strike at Israel. Number two, that Israel has overwhelming military advantage, but in built-up areas that advantage is neutralized, because built-up areas are unpredictable, and that is something limitations of modern armies to operate in built-up areas have been shown with the US armed forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Gaza, as you know, is fully built up. Also, built-up areas really degrade technology, because technology works when you have open ground. But if you're going from house to house, apartment to apartment, street to street, technology still helps, but technology does degrade it very fast, and the technological advantage is not the same as it might be in conventional warfare. Number 3, Iron Dome, which Israel uses, is great. It's very expensive. It's great. But the fact is that Hamas is also improving, and Hamas has large quantities of these rockets. And as Joseph Stalin famously said, something like quantity itself is a quality. Fourth point from Kurdistan: stalemate is bad for all, that there should be a solution, but to think that there can be an Arab-Israeli deal bypassing the Palestinians, it's not going to happen. That's unsustainable. You will have to get the Palestinians on board for any deal or any settlement. It's not as if the Saudis and the Israelis can settle something and bury the hatchet in the Palestinians' back. That is unsustainable. That's not going to happen. And finally, he says, non-solving this situation is not a solution, as it has created 4 Palestinian failed states. What are these 4 faith Palestinian states? I will tell you from Kurdistan. Gaza with Hamas. Second, West Bank with Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority and Hamas, by the way, are rivals, political rivals. Number 3, Israeli Arabs. These are Arabs who live in Israel, and look at this population. See how they are divided. If you generally look at today's population mix, West Bank is about 3 million people, Palestinian, mostly Muslim, some Christian, 3 million people. Gaza, a little over 2 million people. And then you have Israeli Arabs. These are Arabs who live in Israel, who have the right to vote. Not all the rights that Jews have. For example, under a law passed by the Knesset, Israeli Arabs cannot criticize the Israeli state, whereas in Israel, anybody can criticize the Palestinians. That is also from Kortisman's paper. So this is 3 plus 2, 5 plus 2, 7. It's almost 7 million Palestinians under 3 different entities. So he says each one of these is a failed state. So Gaza under Hamas is a failed state, number 1. Second, West Bank under Palestinian Authority is a failed state. Number 3, Israeli Arabs are a failed state. Fourth, he says East Jerusalem is a failed state. And fifth, and this is his most stunning conclusion, he says if this goes on, this could create a 5th failed state, as the Israeli politics has declined from an effective democracy to something beginning to approach chaocracy. So this is Kortisman's final turn of the knife. With that, I conclude this rather long episode of Cut the Clutter, but you know it's a big news day, and we'll look at other aspects of the situation as we go on. I suspect for most of the rest of this week, we will stay with the Israel-Middle East story.